I lived and went to college in the same city where I grew up, and all my friends lived nearby. My father owned and operated a local hardware and building supply store. He wanted me to get my degree and come back to help him, and then maybe take over the store when I was ready. He made me work in the store, and I spent many evenings and weekends there before high school and during college. I loved talking to the contractors, who bought materials from us when I made deliveries. I watched the build and asked them questions. I can't say I hated working in my father's store, but it wasn't my favorite thing. The best part of the job was the deliveries, especially when I did them alone. I really didn't want to take over the store when I wasn't working in the store. Like many other boys in town, I mowed lawns for pocket money. One day I was working for a widow, and I watched as she tried to fix the outbuilding in her yard. She had a lot of problems, partly because she didn't have the right tools, partly because she wasn't strong enough for hard work, and partly because she just didn't know how to act. Finally, when I finished my work, I offered to help. I don't know where I got the courage to insist that she hire me, but I did. I told her that it was obvious that I told her that I could help, pointing out the mistakes she was making and saying that she simply wasn't strong or tall enough for the job. I offered to do it for $50 if she bought the materials. I told her that if she didn't like my work, she didn't have to pay me. Finally, she agreed, and I did the job to her satisfaction. She paid me, but she did something more valuable for me than just giving me money. She also told her other single friends about my work and how well I did both renovating and mowing her lawn. I started getting calls from other women who wanted me to fix something for them. I always tried to do the job right. If I didn't know something, I asked one of my contractor friends. I have always charged less than a real licensed contractor. After I worked for several older women, calls started coming in from men. By the time I went to college, I had already started a small repair business and had acquired many of the licenses I needed to operate it. I also still had my lawn care business, which sometimes meant I had to hire friends to help me cope with the workload, especially in the summer. I was able to make enough money to pay for college, buy a new truck, and pay for dates. I also enjoyed my youth, although I must admit that I worked long hours. And my dates always started later than most guys. After finishing school, I got tired of living with my parents, so I rented an apartment. I lived in an apartment my first year of college, but I didn't like it, and started looking for a house to rent when my lease was up. One of my high school friends just got divorced from my best friend Joe. She caught him cheating with one of our classmates and filed for divorce. Glenda worked as a real estate agent and was struggling to make ends meet. We were chatting one evening about her failed marriage at our favorite place, where we both lived in apartments and neither of us liked it. I told her I was thinking about renting a house. I asked if she had any inexpensive options for me. She asked how much I could pay. When I told her, she looked shocked and said, "Damn, Stan, with a 30-year mortgage. You could get a pretty decent house with that loan. Why don't you buy instead of renting? That way you'll be building equity instead of throwing money away on rent." I said I'd never thought about it. He said I didn't have much for a down payment. "Well, let me check a few things and I'll get back to you," she said when I left the bar. I'd forgotten about our conversation by the end of the evening, but I don't think I'd thought about the commission doing its job properly. The following Monday evening, Glenda called and asked to meet her again at the bar. When I walked in, she was full of energy and started talking as soon as I sat down. She said, "Stan, I found a few places that I think you can afford, but most of them are not in very good areas. I found one place for sale that you'll like. Remember Harris's old house on the edge of town?" I nodded, and she continued, "Well, when they got older, they built a new 3. They converted the car garage into an apartment for their mother. I think they plan to use it for care if needed. The new garage was just a few feet from the house. Do you remember the house burned down 2 years ago?" I nodded again, and she said they decided not to rebuild it and move to a retirement home here in town. The garage was barely damaged. I was talking to Ida the other day, and she said they were tired of paying taxes and maintaining the place. They want to sell it. I took it for sale. There are 20 acres and they are asking for $110,000. There's a bit of work to be done on the garage and the apartment, but it'd be a great fit for you. The best part is that all the utilities are already there. There are new houses being built in this area, so I think a contractor will buy it and subdivide it soon. It's not on the multiple listing service yet, so it's only been shown a couple of times. They only need about $2,000. The first payment is $20,000. Stan, the monthly payment on the loan will be about half of what you're paying in rent now, so if you can make the down payment, I think it'll be a good deal for you. I've been thinking about this for a while. I didn't have that much money, but as far as I remembered, I really wanted it. I told I wanted to watch it the next evening. Later that evening, I went to my father and asked if he could lend me money for a down payment. He wasn't too keen on the idea, but I reminded him that the monthly payments for the land would be half the rent I was paying. I'm currently paying, so I could pay him back some of the money each month after I'd renovated and furnished the apartment to a high standard. We finally agreed that he would lend me money for a down payment if I wanted to buy the place. After inspecting it the next evening, I went to the place and fell in love with it again. Even with the charred remains of the house, it was more beautiful than I remembered. The fire did not destroy all the trees and bushes in the yard. I could see a small stream flowing below. I told Glenda to prepare an offer for $90,000. On Tuesday evening after class, I got a call from Glenda. She sounded excited and said, "Stan, I can't believe it. When I presented the offer to Ida and Homer, they were going to reject it outright." I was about to leave when Ida turned to Homer and asked if he thought I was the one. They're a nice couple who've had their lawn mowed for many years. They asked me if I did lawn maintenance at school, and when I said yes, they smiled and started telling me what a good guy you are. Anyway, they won't accept $90, but they made a counteroffer at 975 zizor, which I thought was pretty good. I didn't think twice and said, "Yeah, that's great. Tell them I'll pay that amount and I want ownership at closing." The bank required my father to be the guarantor for the loan, but everything went well and I took possession of the property at the end of April. I made the necessary renovations and moved into the apartment at the beginning of June. The next few months kept me busy with a summer lawn care business and small construction. At this point, I had 10 employees, most of them seasonal. I had some time to meet with Patty and start cleaning up my property after I cleared away the debris from the burned house. I asked an engineer friend to check the foundation, and he said it was fine since the second floor hadn't burned through. I could use it for the renovation, which saved several thousand by not having to do as much excavation and pour a new foundation. The house was a small, old structure of about the house was 10,000 square feet on the ground floor. I rented an excavator and extended the foundation towards the garage, doing almost all the work myself. I started using my free time and extra money to build myself a nice house. I connected the house to the garage with a glass-covered gallery with a cement floor. I installed a large hot tub. I put a wood stove in the covered gallery for heat and ran ductwork to the rest of the house. I finished building the house the summer after I graduated from college. It was 2,450 square feet and was built with comfort and convenience in mind. I had stainless appliances, granite countertops, oak trim, and a brick exterior. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a very prestigious house. I had a beautiful south-facing covered patio overlooking a small creek. I finished it for half the price it would have sold for. Patty adored him when we got married. I was under the impression that Patty was marrying my house, not me, after what I saw. By the time I graduated from college, I was already moving on to new construction. I had built extensions and renovated old houses and garages, but most of my income came from new builds. I had 20 employees. Patty started working for my dad when we got engaged. After completing her degree, she was an employee and assistant manager. Her father was grooming her to become a manager after he retired. I was an only child, so the business would have passed on to us when he died. I bought all the materials from my father, so the family income from my construction business increased. My wife Patty and I had been friends since childhood. I thought, like most married men, that we would be together forever. Of course, we had the usual quarrels like any couple, but they were minor things when we dated in high school and later in college. We broke up like most young couples do. We both dated others and were intimate with others during our breakups, but always came back to each other because we couldn't find anyone we loved more. I had one girl who could have been the one, but one of my friends got involved with her. Before we made that decision during my final year at college, Patty and I became an exclusive couple. I proposed to her at Christmas and she accepted. Patty arranged the wedding for September, after we graduated. The wedding almost didn't happen because Patty wanted to draw up a prenuptial agreement. I now think it was a mistake to get married. Let me continue with the sad story. It seems that Patty had inherited several $100,000 from her grandfather. She, or maybe her father, didn't want me to get my hands on it. I told her I wasn't going to spend her money, and was offended that she thought I'd get married for the sake of it. In any case, we didn't talk very nicely to each other that evening when she told me. I think I was happy that evening my parents decided to take a ride and come see me. When Patty heard them knocking on the door, she got so angry that she ran out. I let them in before she walked past them, and I heard her say, "You need to talk to your son, otherwise this wedding might not happen." My parents watched as she ran out to the car and drove away. She ran out to the car and drove away. I was standing there with the marriage contract in my hands when they turned to me and asked what we were fighting about. I told them and my mom said, "Oh, Stan, we thought it was something big. We know you don't marry for her money, so what's the problem? Sign the contract and marry the girl if you love her." My dad sat with a frown on his face. He asked if he could see the contract. He looked it over carefully and said everything seemed to be in order, except that the contract doesn't take into account property owned before marriage or potential inheritance from us. It was done for her son. Why don't we show this to a lawyer and not ask him to make suggestions? I took the contract and Dad was right, the contract only mentioned her money and her inheritance. I started to get angry again. I agreed with him, and he said he would make an appointment with a business lawyer. I use him for my legal matters, so I guess he was my lawyer too. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday and the lawyer agreed with Dad. He scanned the contract into the computer and made the changes we discussed. When he was done, the agreement included my property and business, as well as any possible inheritance, just like it did for Patty. I went to her house in the evening when the lawyer finished making the changes. I'd already signed it. When Patty and her father read the new contract, they were both angry. He looked at me and said, "Why the hell did you do that? We need to change the contract. I thought you loved my daughter, and now you're saying she wants to take your house and business. You know that when you get married, this will become her home too. If you get divorced, don't you think she deserves a place to live?" I got angry and replied, "Yes, sir. She deserves a place to live." But it seemed I think it's only fair that if her property and possible inheritance are protected in the event of a divorce, the same should apply to me. As you'll see, everything accumulated during the marriage is divided equally if the marriage ends due to infidelity. In this case, everyone leaves with what they came into the marriage or inherited. The innocent party gets 75% of the total assets accumulated after the marriage. I think it should be some kind of compensation or punishment for treason. Patty and her father were furious over the proposed contract over the next few days. The situation between us was tense. I asked several times why she was so angry about the contract because she was the one who Patty said she wanted a prenuptial agreement because she thought I wanted to kick her out if we got divorced, and that she liked the house too. She didn't think it was fair that I keep the house if we divorced. I was almost ready to demand the ring back when she started to thaw. She signed the modified contract, but it took us a few weeks to get back on track. We finally forgot. We got over our anger and forgave each other for the grievances caused by the contract. We got married as planned, and for the next 2.5 years we didn't look back or regret it. We didn't see each other as lovers, at least I didn't. I caught Patty yesterday. The only problem I had with Patty's job at the hardware store was the flirting. I have to admit that I was a little jealous, but I knew many men who bought from my father. They were womanizers, and Patty was a beautiful, funny woman. One of my friends, Joe, was already divorced because he couldn't keep his hands off the ladies. I often walked into the store and found him flirting with Patty. We didn't fight about her or him, but we did have discussions. She was flirting with other men, but we had some pretty intense discussions about it. Patty argued, and I agreed with her that she needed to flirt a little to keep her clients happy. I told her that she should just be kind and friendly and not flirt. Of course, she didn't like me calling her actions flirting, and said that she was just being friendly. My degree was in construction management. Patty's degree was in business administration, so our degrees matched our professions. Not long after graduating from college, I decided we had enough money to build a house to sell. My father let me make an exception to his rule that bills be paid in full at the end of the month. He said that since I was from a family, I could borrow up to $100. I paid $0 and would pay the rest when the house sold. My dad kept a lien on the property in case something happened to me. All other customers had to pay in full each month. I was good at my job and I knew it. I was a general contractor, but I used very few subcontractors. I had my own crews for framing, drywall, trim, plumbing, and electrical work. I was only hired for heating and air conditioning installation. I even used my lawn care crews to landscape and install lawns on my projects. I used houses for sale to keep my crews busy during the off-season. I didn't want to fire my people. I didn't have to, but I tried to keep them busy. We finished the first house and sold it before we'd finished landscaping. I started a second one and it sold before we'd finished it. The new owners wanted us to complete it. I'd made enough money to build 2 houses at the same time. Then the business took off. I didn't have time for the small jobs that had previously been my main source of income. Between Patty's salary and my profit, we were doing really well. We quickly became one of the highest income families in our small town of about 25. We had a lot of success, but it came at a price. I worked 8 to 10 hours a day with crew and did paperwork before and after construction in the evenings. I also met with clients and potential clients to discuss projects and close deals. Patty also began working late at the office to handle the bookkeeping. We had less and less time for each other. I would often pass by a construction center, and I'd see her car, and 2 or 3 others there sometimes. I'd walk in and there'd be Joe or one of our classmates sitting and talking to her. They all worked in the construction industry and were supposedly getting quotes from her, but something didn't seem right. Sometimes Patty would be flushed when I came into the office, and often they'd be drinking beer. I joined them. We had a beer and talked, but something didn't feel right. I finally decided to disable the local alarm ringer, which usually rang when someone entered the building through any of the doors. I turned off the bell at the warehouse entrance. Before I walked into my father's store yesterday, I was a loving husband with a wife I would die for, and 2 friends I loved. I was waiting for my wife and I to have a child. I am an embittered bastard determined to destroy my wife and friends. I'm not going to do anything that will get me in jail, but I can break down and go crazy. I think you want to know why I changed so much overnight. Well, I didn't change overnight, but I started worrying. A few months ago I changed instantly. Listen to my sad story and follow me on the path of revenge. Last night, as I was driving by the store, I saw Joe and George's trucks in the parking lot. I turned into the parking lot and walked to the door with the bell off. I knew what I would find before I got to Patty's office. I heard her moans and screams from the middle of the building. I quickly pulled out my phone and turned on the camera. The guy didn't even close the office door. I watched and took pictures as they had sex. George walked over to Patty and helped her up. He pulled her towards him and kissed her on the lips. Then he said, "Come on, honey, take off your clothes. I want to play with your breasts." I watched and took pictures while George helped Patty undress. I moved away from the door so that they wouldn't see me until it was time. I remembered that there was usually a tape recorder in my father's office, so I went to have a look. I wanted to record their conversation if I could. I found the recorder and returned it. I placed it on the floor near the door and continued to watch as my wife served 2 former friends. I was even more angry. I heard Joe say, "Patty, are you glad you let me you again at the Christmas party years ago? I told you this would be the best sex of your life." I was talking to Jared the other day and told him about the hot babe I'm having sex with. He wants to meet you. Are you sure you won't let him come over one night? She pushed him away and turned to him. I like having sex with you too. I love it, but I don't want anyone else. I said I'd stick by you forever, but you have to be careful. Stan is already starting to get angry about the way you 2 act when he sees you. If you don't calm down, I'll have to stop this. I decided I had recorded enough and taken enough photos when I was in my father's office. I took a baseball bat because I was going to teach Joe and George a lesson. I picked up the bat and headed into the room when a thought occurred to me. George has always been jealous. He was married to his high school sweetheart. She and I met a few times. They didn't get serious until Patty and I got engaged. I enjoyed sex with her, so I wondered if I should seduce her before dealing with him. That would be better retribution than just beating him up. He always cried at school when they fought. He hated it when I dated her. I went to her house. I left the room in the building. I set the alarm and reconnected the doorbell wires. I couldn't wait for Patty and her 2 friends to set off the alarm as they left the store. The alarms were turned off using keypads at the doors, and motion sensors were installed in the main part of the building. The alarm was triggered. I knew Patty would be able to disable it, but the damage would have already been done. She'd wonder how she turned it on, and would have to wait for the police. I wonder if Joe and George will be smart enough to leave before the police arrive. Patty came home very late. She entered the house and nervously approached me. I looked at her face. She seemed a bit nervous, so I asked her what was up. She said she'd been late to work and couldn't balance the books. I thought, what were you doing tonight? I figured she'd come in or at least call since I was so late. She said she was already there. You're used to my late returns, so I didn't think you'd want to come over for a beer with you and your friends. Patty's face turned pale, then she blushed. I can't believe you, Stan. I've told you there's nothing between us. Joe and George weren't even there. Why can't you understand that I need to communicate with clients to keep them happy? I know you have to fawn over customers, but I was just driving by around 6. I thought I saw their trucks there, but they were actually there when I got there. They came in almost at closing time, so I waited for them to pay and upload their orders before I started doing the bookkeeping. They left shortly after closing. I just meant that they weren't there all the time while I was there. I'm tired, so I'm going to take a hot bath and go to bed. I grinned and said, Great, I'll join you soon. I've been excited all day. Patty looked worried. She said, No, sorry, honey, I'm really tired. Let's do this in the morning before work. I just chuckled to myself. I thought that I would grow cold towards her and the world. I wondered how many times I had received secondary pleasure without knowing it. I also made a mental note to get my health checked for infections. I just said that to annoy Patty. The next morning I left before Patty woke up as soon as my lawyer's office opened. I gave him a call and made an appointment. He said he'd meet me at noon if I bought him lunch. I agreed, and we had a quick lunch at a cafe next to his office. He wanted to discuss the problem over lunch, but I said we should talk in his office. He said fine, but what could be so secret that it can't be discussed here? I often do business over lunch. I just said that this concerns my business and I don't want the information to. When we got back to his office, I started to explain the problem. I said I wanted a divorce immediately because of Patty's infidelity, and I wanted the prenuptial agreement to be followed to the letter. I showed him the photographs and let him listen to the recording. I also asked that he only show photos of Joe and Patty and not use the recording unless necessary. Why do you want to leave George? He asked. Well, I'm not sure you'll like it, but after the divorce I have plans for George. I don't want to warn him, Lawrence said. I hope you're not planning anything violent, the court officer interrupted. As a court officer, it's my responsibility to report this. I'm not planning violence, I said. I once dated George's wife, Susan. They broke up several times, and twice I dated her during there. I think I'll try to get closer to Susan to make George angry. I want to give her information about his cheating, but first I want to play with his mind. I'll get some retribution. He always got so angry when she dated anyone, to others. I heard that he gets jealous when she dances with others for too long. I want to see if I can seduce her after the divorce. I'll let him know about it. I also intend to try to seduce her. Joe's fiancé, there won't be any violence unless these idiots start first. Stan, I don't like this. It might backfire on you, but you're right. There's nothing illegal about seducing a woman. They can sue you for alienation of love, though. I laughed and said, let them try. I'll countersue and I have photos and tape for the case. Do you think it'll be a close call? Lawrence thought. He finally agreed that it was possible the lawsuits would balance out if they were filed. However, he reminded me that I may have more assets than them. Even if both suits were heard in court, I might end up worse off financially. Besides, don't you think this behavior towards these women is disgusting? I think it will hurt them anyway if they find out about their men's betrayal. Using them like this is bound to cause them more pain. I said I didn't care. They chose those cheaters on Wednesday. I got a call from Lawrence. He said the divorce papers were ready to be filed, and he was going to serve Patty with them this afternoon. Great. I said I'd start changing the locks on the doors in the morning and pack as many of her clothes as I can and leave them on the porch. I'll put pictures of her and Joe on each door so she can see them when she comes. Oh, and I don't know who was more angry when the scandal broke out in my father's store. I received a call from 3 very angry people within minutes of delivering the papers to Patty. She called and threw a tantrum, then said that I would regret it. My dad was called right after she left the store. Her father called and cursed me. After I ended the call with my father, I told him I was grateful for his insistence on the prenuptial agreement. I filed for divorce because I caught Patty having sex in her office with Joe and George. I have photos and recordings thanks to you. I'll keep my home and business as well as 3/4 of our assets. You might want to change the locks on the store and the passwords on the computers. In case she decides to do something we don't like I suggest, we fire her, but that's your call. You need to decide if she can be trusted after this. I just can't believe it. Right here in the store. Okay, I'll get the girls to work on changes to the computer and stuff. We'll come back tonight to talk. When my father and mother came to see me in the evening, they were depressed. Mom especially loved Patty. I convinced them it was best to fire Patty. I said I really believed she could hurt the business if she stayed. The next morning, when Patty found out that she had lost not only her husband but also her job, she became very angry. The following Monday, I received a counterclaim for divorce, and my father received a claim for wrongful termination. It looks like we were going to spend a lot of money on this. Lawrence, because of this mess, we decided to get an external audit of the business done. I was sitting at the bar on Tuesday night when Glenda walked in. She didn't ask if she could join me but just plopped down in the booth across from me. "What have I heard about you and Patty?" she asked. I said it depends on what you heard, but I'm guessing most of the rumors are true. I caught her and Joe I heard that you had sex in her office after work the other day. I have pictures and I've filed for divorce. People in town say that you were just jealous of her male friends and filed for divorce. She also says that you acted vindictively and forced your father to fire her so she couldn't live. I laughed and said, "Well, Dad did fire her, but that was because she did what she did in the office and because he asked our accountant to check the books. I don't know what they found, but she made a few more mistakes. Let's just forget about it." "Yeah, I'm sorry that happened. I know how you feel. Damn, Joe did the same thing to me. You know, the idiot could never keep his stuff in his pants when he was home." I saw a small tear roll down Glenda's cheek. I reached over and wiped it off her face. Then I said, "Yeah, I think he's had most of the girls he's dated and a lot of other men's wives. I didn't want Patty flirting with him or being alone with him, partly because I didn't think he would do this to a friend." Glenda and I had a couple of beers and chatted. Then I walked her to the car before she sat down. She kissed me tenderly on the cheek. "Everything will work out, Stan." The days dragged on, and work came and went. Some of my friends supported me through my grief, while some supported Patty, and were no longer my friends. I had to deal with some less than friendly folks at work on Monday. I was at home on Sunday when I heard a voice calling me from the direction of the house. I didn't get up to greet the visitor. I actually fell over trying to get up. I've been talking to John Barleycorn all day, and I'm afraid he tripped me. Well, to be precise, when I was trying to get up from the Adira chair, I tripped my leg. I fell over and landed on my bum in a puddle of Glenmorangie spill. There I was, lying in it, looking up at one of my best supporters, Glenda. She was laughing at me. She crouched down to help me up, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. I looked at the beautiful, smooth, feminine thighs. Glenda saw where I was looking and said, "Damn it, Stan, put your eyes back where they belong." She turned her knees away from me and extended her hand. "Here, give me your hand. I'll help you get up. Can you even stand on your own?" I have to admit I giggled more than I laughed when I said, "Well, I thought I could, but here I am lying at your feet trying to do it," before she could help me up. Glenda laughed loudly at my comment. She helped me up and I was able to more or less stand up on my own. After we stopped laughing, I invited her to sit in one of the chairs opposite. I was almost back in my seat when Glenda came in. She ended up being an almost permanent guest in my home. Besides my mother, she was almost the only woman who visited me, and I appreciated her company. Unfortunately, I didn't really want to see anyone today, and I think that affected our conversation. Finally, Glenda looked at me and asked, "Stan, did I do something to make you angry? I know it's mostly my fault that you looked up my skirt when you—" I felt my heart clench and my eyes begin to water. I was in pain and couldn't speak. I made a face and simply shook my head at Glenda. "No," I whispered. "You're almost the only one who still comes today." I felt sorry for myself. I was also thinking about the trial tomorrow. A few months ago I thought I had everything. a loving wife, a great business. You know, the American dream. Now all that I have is this broken heart. My marriage is broken, and I'm facing legal battles to keep my and my family's assets. I'm so angry at life and what Patty has done that I've alienated most of my friends. All I know is that I want to hurt Patty, Joe, and George and Patty's parents so much that they'll regret ever knowing me. That's almost all I think about. I have plans, and they are not very pleasant. I know when I fulfill them you will leave too. Damn it. I don't want to. I want to punish these bastards, but I know it will hurt me too. Glenda stood up from her chair and sat on my lap. She hugged me and just held me. I felt her soft breasts pressing against my chest and remembered that she wasn't wearing any underwear. I felt Glenda change position and heard her gasp. Why stand? Why do you think I'll leave if you take revenge on those bastards? We're friends for life. Aren't we? What are you planning to do that's so terrible, and I still don't understand why you're mad at George? It's simple. I haven't told anyone. But George was one of Patty's lovers, so I owe him one. I'm going to seduce their women like they seduced mine. Glenda pulled away from me and looked into my eyes. Stan, you're not going to. What do you mean? And you still haven't told me why you want to hurt George. I haven't told. I owe George one for seducing their women like they seduced mine. Stan, you can't do this. It'll hurt the women too. Please don't do this. It'll break their hearts when they find out you were just playing with them. They're already suffering just being with these cheating scumbags. Glenda pulled away from me and stood up. She looked at me and Stan said, You're right. If you do something that terrible, I don't know what I'll do. Glenda turned and walked away from my yard. I heard her car drive away shortly after my divorce. It moved quickly since we had a good prenuptial agreement. Everything was quite simple. I was just waiting for the court to complete the process. But litigating a wrongful termination claim was a different matter. We were all nervous when the trial started. Patty made it seem like my father and I were monsters. She twisted our words and tried to insert her own. Things started to change when our lawyer started asking questions. He drew attention to how much time Patty spent flirting with clients. He called witnesses inside and outside the company to corroborate her behavior. He mentioned that she regularly drank beer in the store. It was illegal to do so outside of a work area. He made it seem like she was neglecting her responsibilities to do so. Lawrence called his father's accountant, and this witness caused significant damage to Patty's reputation. The accountant said Patty allowed Joe and George to exceed their preset spending limits and gave them extra time to pay. In fact, their bills were 3 months overdue, and they were only making token payments. Patty's attorney then asked, I was also asked about my large credit bill and how I had not been paying it off every month as the business required other clients to do. My father said that was true, but that he had made a special deal with me and taken an ownership interest in my buildings to protect the business in case I couldn't pay. He received the cost of the materials I purchased for the buildings, plus 3% of the ownership for an advance on the materials. He was quite insistent on this point. Patty not only gave Joe and George more loans than she was allowed to, but she didn't do anything to protect the business if they couldn't pay them back. After 2 days of testimony, the hearing finally ended, and the judge made a decision. Patty and her father were almost held in contempt of court. They complained loudly that the decision wasn't in her favor. The judge said, Mrs. Tremaine, you are lucky that your father. The judge said that he wasn't going to take this case to the authorities. I think he could bring a case of criminal negligence, perhaps even theft, against you and your 2 accomplices. I suggest you leave the courtroom and think about the kindness these people showed you. If they countersued, I'm sure they could win a significant recovery from you. Patty and her father stormed out of the courtroom, their faces white. I was leaving the courtroom when Lawrence stopped me. He said, Stan, I have good news for you. A few minutes before the hearing this morning, I received notice that the judge had signed divorce papers. Your marriage will be dissolved. Do you want me to mail you the documents, or will you pick them up that evening? My parents and I were sitting on their patio relaxing after court. We were happy and sad at the same time. We were glad that everything went well and sad about how my marriage and his relationship with Patty ended. We had a barbecue and were now sitting with our drinks, just relaxing. In fact, we all felt the effects of alcohol. I was going to tell my parents how angry I was. I said I still can't believe my friends would do this to me. I was on my own. I told my mother, if I need it, I'll make them pay for this. She looked at me in shock and said, "Oh, Stan, please don't do this. A man who lives with bitterness is a pathetic man. Take the right path and live your life to the fullest. In the long run, it will make you happy and give you a more fulfilling life. Maybe even make these three regret what they did." We heard soft footsteps on the sidewalk, and then a woman's voice said, "Thank you, Mrs. Tremaine." That's exactly what I tried to convince him to do. If anyone can understand his pain, it's me. I think I've gotten over it. At first, I was the same as Stan. I wanted not only to punish Joe, but to do it gradually. As time went on, I began to let go of my anger and desire for revenge. One day, I realized that I no longer cared. I'm a better person in every way without that. Cheating bastard. Glenda walked fully onto the patio and looked straight at me. "Stan, I know how empty you feel right now. I know the feelings that still burn inside you, but believe me, dwelling on them only makes them worse. Please, please let go of the anger and start living again. Next time, be more careful. Be more confident in who you choose as friends and the woman you take into your heart. You were honest with yourself and admitted that hindsight is always clearer. I think you would see that the seeds of this broken love were sown before I married Patty. I know I could and still see it in Joe. He always looked at other women and always talked to them. He was always more attentive to them when we were together than to me, but I thought I loved him. I know you said that Patty was very similar. She always flirted with other men and enjoyed their attention. Look into your heart and use this knowledge to become a better person to their level. Don't hurt anyone. It won't make you feel better in the long run." I looked at Glenda. She stood looking at me, and I could have sworn there were tears in her eyes. The sun was behind her, and her thin dress hid almost nothing. I could see the outline of her very feminine, very desirable body, and I felt my body react with great effort. I turned away from her. I felt a flash of I have to say, I'm not yet completely divorced and already drooling over my friend Glenda. I hope you don't mind me dropping in like this, but I was on my way to the tavern and wanted to congratulate you on your success today. I have to admit the phone lines were ringing tonight with the news of your success in Courtney. Glenda smiled at all of us and then continued, "I'll go, but I'll be careful and don't. Oh hell, I already heard that Patty has friends who are spreading rumors and making threats about you. I just wanted you to be careful and look after yourself if you drink too much." Glenda turned and quickly walked outside. We all just sat and looked at each other, shocked. My mom summed it up perfectly when she said, "Oh, I just can't believe it. How could anyone? Why would anyone be so mad at us?" We carried on chatting for a while but didn't get into anything important. I decided I was sober enough to go. I was getting ready to leave when the phone rang. My mom answered and I heard her say, "Oh no, he'll come as soon as he can." She left the house crying and went to her dad. She said, "Cedric, it was the police. The store's alarm went off and they want you to come and turn it off and see if anything is missing." They said, The first police officer on the scene said that almost all the windows were broken. When we arrived at the store, 2 police cars were waiting for us. We went in and turned off the alarm. We walked around the store but didn't find anything obviously missing. We told the officers that we'd need to take an inventory to be sure that some goods inside were damaged by thrown stones. We called my mom and asked her to bring sleeping bags so we could spend the night in the store. We called the insurance company early the next morning and arranged for the glass to be replaced later that evening. When I got home, I found that several windows were broken. I also found that some of my windows were broken. I called the police to report the vandalism. They asked me a few questions, and when they asked if I knew anyone who could have done it, I said that I didn't think so a few months ago, but now, after what I heard last night and what happened last night, I think there might be a possibility. I got divorced because I caught my wife cheating with 2 of my friends. She was an assistant manager at my parents' store when I filed for divorce. My dad fired her. He checked the books and found many violations. She filed a wrongful termination claim against him, and he won the case yesterday. A friend told my parents and me that my wife and 2 some of our friends threatened us. I think one of them or maybe her family may be involved. I know her father was really angry about all this and swore at me several times. Of course, we said something similar when the police took statements at the store. I felt more confident that we were on the right track after the vandalism. Life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could after the hole that was ripped out of our lives. When Patty left, my parents tried to get back to their old life, but I had a hard time. I managed, but usually when I got home, I would think about Patty, and the evenings would be a nightmare. When I was working, I was able to function normally, but the lonely times were terrible because I hadn't been truly alone all night for several years. I started going to a cafe for dinner almost every evening. I usually ate at I started going to sports bars or local fast food joints, so I ended up drinking more than before. This only made me feel lonelier and angrier at Patty and her lovers. Sometimes I saw some of my coworkers or friends who were still with me. They tried to cheer me up and get me to drink less, but I didn't let them. Sometimes I would meet Glenda, who would try to convince me to let it all go. One Thursday evening, I saw a group of women sitting around a table drinking and having fun. One of them caught my attention. It was Susan, George's wife. I knew that no one knew that George was one of Patty's lovers. I remembered my promise to make him pay. I walked up to the table and said hello to Susan. I said, "Hi Susan, long time no see. Will you dance with me?" Susan looked at me with a frown on her face. Then she smiled. "Of course, Stan," she said. I smiled and took her hand. I helped her up and gave her a hug around the waist. Then we went to the dance floor. We'd only been dancing for a few seconds when the song ended. She wanted to go back to the table, but I held her back. I said, "Oh, come on, Sue. You promised and you pulled me a dance before the song even started. Can't you give me a whole song?" Susan relaxed and smiled. She returned to my arms as the next song began, and we started to sway to the music. She sighed. She said, "You've always been a good dancer. It's a shame George doesn't take me dancing more often. I always loved dancing when we were dating." She rested her cheek on my chest, and we swayed to the music until the end of the song. And she came back to me during the dance. I said, "I don't want to make you nervous. Ever since Patty left, I've been so lonely, and it's good to at least dance with someone again sometimes." Susan raised her head and said, "Well, Stan, it's your fault. If you weren't so jealous, you wouldn't have lost." I pulled my head back and stared at her before she could react. I hissed, "Jealous, yes. I won't stand for my wife having sex with my friends and not doing anything about it. You're right. I kicked her out and I would do it again, but I still miss her." Susan interrupted me. She said, "What do you mean? I heard you just got mad at Patty for flirting and kicked her out of the house and then filed for divorce." I left because I still wanted to hurt him by seeing his wife with someone else. When I finished, Susan looked at me and said, "Stan, I just can't believe this. I know Joe is a womanizer, but even he wouldn't do that to a friend. I've known Patty all my life, and she's not like that. Are you sure you really saw it?" I was furious. I said, "Yes, I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, come to my house and I'll show you the..." I turned and started to walk away when Susan grabbed my arm. "Stan, I'm sorry, but George said you were just..." Joe and Patty, I'd forgotten about George. I remembered his photos were on my phone when I heard Susan scream and saw her stop scrolling through the photos. She looked at the photo and tears began to flow down her cheeks. She moved to the next photo and started crying. She dropped the phone and ran to her friends. Now I feel like scum. I ran after Susan, but her friends stopped me. One of them said, "What did you do to her? I thought we were friends, so why is she crying?" I pushed my way through the two women and knelt down next to Susan. I took her hand and said, "Susan, I'm sorry. When you didn't believe me, I got angry and decided to prove that I wasn't lying. I forgot there were pictures of George on the phone." One of her friends grabbed my phone from the floor and started looking at the photos. I tried to calm Susan down and gathered around my phone to look at the photos. They were all muttering quietly, and I could tell they weren't sure who to be more angry at, me or George. Finally, Susan looked at me and said, "Just go away, Stan. Please leave me alone." I stood up and took the phone from the woman. I slowly left and drove back home. I felt terrible. I really liked Susan, and now I was the cause of her unhappiness. I wondered how I could have you ever thought that my plan for her was the right one. I was sick of the pain I caused her by simply letting her see the photos. How much worse would it have been if I had put her to bed and then sent the photos to George before showing them to her? I was sitting on my patio drinking whiskey when I heard a car drive into my driveway. I didn't move even when I heard a car door slam and someone knocking on my front door. I took another sip of whiskey. I sat and sipped my drink, enjoying the view of my little slice of heaven. I could make out the silhouettes of trees in the moonlight. Finally, I heard someone walking across the yard and a voice shouted, "Stan, where the hell are you? I know you're home. I see your car in the garage." "Stan, I'm not leaving until you talk with me." "Open the door," she said. As she spoke, the woman walked to the back door and began knocking on it. I couldn't stand it anymore and said, "Okay, stop knocking on my house, I'm here. What do you want?" I turned and saw Glenda walking towards me. "Damn you, Stan. I just came from the bar and grill. Did you really have to hurt Susan like that? You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? I should have beaten you up." I sat and looked at Glenda, then grabbed her hand. As she swung at me while I was struggling with her, trying to keep her from, she hit me and lost her balance, falling into my lap. I quickly hugged her and held her, saying, "Glenda, stop. If you don't, I'm afraid one of us will get hurt. Look, I'm sorry. I upset Susan tonight, but it wasn't intentional. I was thinking about what you said and just danced with her." She started to reproach me for the way I treated poor Patty, and I lost control. She said that I got what I deserved. I told her I had photos of Joe and Patty on my phone without thinking. I forgot there were also pictures of George. She saw them and started crying. She and her friends told me to leave, so I left. Everyone I talked to about my revenge plan discouraged me from seducing women. I had already decided not to do that. I heard her, but I didn't think or do it on purpose. I also didn't think she deserved to know what a jerk and a cheater George is. Of course, if she was smarter, she would have realized it by now. She caught him cheating enough times while we were at school to know that he was cheating. Once a cheater, always a cheater, as they say. Glenda was still struggling, but she had calmed down considerably. She relaxed even more and demanded to be released. I loosened the hug and she moved to one of the chairs. I could tell she was looking at me. I heard a sigh, then she said, "Stan, I don't know what to believe. When I got to the bar and grill, Susan and her friends were gone, but everyone I talked to said you were a creep for her. They said you were. She was dancing, and then she pulled away from you and ran to her desk crying. I just thought, are you sure you didn't do anything to her?" I took out my phone and tossed it to Glenda. I said, "Call her yourself and ask her what I did." All I did was forget about the photos on my phone, and she saw them. I didn't. We heard the roar and squeal of tires almost immediately after this. Then we heard the sound of an impact. We heard a car door open and shut, then footsteps and a man's voice shouting, "Stan, you son of a, get out here, I'll kill you, you son of a." We heard a crash and footsteps stomping through my house. Then the lights began to turn on as the person moved from room to room. I saw George swinging at my things as he walked through the house. Then he came into the kitchen. He came back into the kitchen and saw Glenda and me on the patio. He didn't even open the sliding screen door, he just walked through it and walked towards me. I got up from my chair to meet him. I jumped back to see him swing a tire iron at me. He shouted, You shouldn't have shown Susan those damn pictures. It's not my fault you couldn't keep your—" "But no, you were always trying. You tried to take Susan away from me, even at school. You ruined my marriage. This time you'll pay. She kicked me out of the house tonight and said you showed her these photos. You didn't understand that your house and store were destroyed. Now, we have to destroy you." George swung the tire iron again. This time he hit me in the shoulder. It hurt, but it was just a glancing blow. I could barely hear Glenda talking on the phone as I dodged George's punches. I managed to place a chair between us, and after another blow from him, I raised it to use as a shield, perhaps as a weapon. George continued to swing the tire iron and hit the chair. He was so angry that he cried while yelling. Glenda tried to calm him down, but he turned to her and shouted, "Shut up! I'd guess you're out there somewhere. Birds of a feather flock together, don't they? What are you here to celebrate yet another act of meanness to Joe?" George swung at Glenda, and the edge of the tire iron caught on her blouse, tearing it. He stumbled and almost fell as he stumbled. We heard the sirens as the police cars drew closer, we heard the sound of brakes squealing. The officers crossed the yard, following the sounds of a fight. As they entered the patio, George regained his balance and moved toward me again. This time, he lunged and swung the tire iron from above. I was backing away and trying to lift the heavy chair to block the blow when my foot caught on the edge I lost my balance in the flower bed and fell backwards. The chair fell on me and I felt a lot of pain as George tripped and fell on top of me. He released the tire iron but still tried to hit me. The officers approached us and grabbed George. They quickly handcuffed him. One of the officers led him to the car. Another officer pushed back his chair and helped me stand up. "Are you okay, sir?" the officer asked, and I stood there, breathing heavily. I started to shake and felt Glenda hug me. I looked at the officer and said, "Yeah, I think we're okay." He hit me a few times, but nothing serious. "Give us a minute, please." I turned to Glenda and hugged her. I ran my hand through her hair and down her back. I said, "Hush, Glenda. It's okay. It's over, honey. Calm down." Finally, I felt Glenda relax. She stopped shaking from sobbing and just held on to me. I leaned over and kissed the top of her head. I turned to the officer. "Okay, I think she's calmed down. Can we continue?" I looked up and saw a couple of people in civilian clothes approaching the yard. They already had notepads and cameras. It took 2 hours to testify and show the damage to the house. George drove into Glenda's car. When he arrived, we had to fill out reports on that too. It turned out he was drunk. It looks like he'll be facing multiple charges: drunk driving, burglary, assault, and possibly attempted murder. By the time all the officers had left, Glenda was still holding on to me and crying quietly as we sat on the couch. I looked at my watch and saw that it was almost 3. It was 10 p.m. I sat with Glenda, holding her gently until she fell asleep. I stood up and picked her up, carrying her to the guest room and laying her on the bed. I removed her shoes and covered her with a blanket, then went to my room by myself. The next morning, I was still asleep at 10. When I heard a knock on the damaged front door and footsteps across the living room and down the hallway, I jumped out of bed and hid behind the door in case it was ill-wishers. The footsteps were approaching, and I heard voices, female and male. Finally, I recognized them and came out of hiding to meet my father and mother. Susan was with them. All 3 of them flinched when I emerged from hiding. Susan and Mom gasped when they saw me. Dad said, "Damn, Stan. You look terrible. Are you okay, son?" My left arm was hanging almost lifeless from the bruise. I knew I needed to get an X-ray. Rhea had a few scratches and was pretty dirty because I didn't even wash myself before bed. I smiled and said, "Yeah, I guess so. My arm hurts like hell and the house is a mess, but at least I'm alive." Susan came up to me and hugged me. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Oh, Stan, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault when that drunk cheating bastard came home last night. I didn't even let him in. I put some of his clothes in a suitcase and threw them on the porch. I told him we were done and told him to leave. I'm so sorry. I told him I saw the pictures on your phone. I didn't know he was going to try to kill you, Stan," while she was talking. Glenda came up to us. She stood behind her parents and Susan, looking at us. She came and stood next to me. Her face looked scared as she gently touched my left hand. She gasped as I winced in pain and stepped back. She wanted to leave, but I hugged her. She tensed, then relaxed and pressed herself against me. All 3 of my guests were looking at us. I said, "Glenda was here when George arrived." I looked at Susan and continued, "She was scolding me for how I treated you. When George broke into my yard and crashed into her car, she saw the whole thing and almost got hurt when George tried to hit her with a tire iron." As I was saying this, I noticed that Glenda's blouse was still torn, and as she moved, I could see her breasts covered by her bra. What bothered me most was the blood on her white blouse. I quickly turned her towards me and I pulled her blouse open, saying, "Oh my God, are you really hurt?" "Sorry, Glenda. I didn't know that guy actually hit you. Why didn't you say you were hurt?" Glenda grabbed her blouse and tried to cover it up as I leaned over to see how badly it was cut. She stepped away from me and stood with her face turned to the side. "It's okay, it only grazed the skin a little," she said. "It was just a graze, no more than 2 inches. I was fine." My mom and Susan grabbed Glenda and took her to the bathroom. I heard my mom say, "Come with me, Glenda. It doesn't matter if it's just a graze, it needs to be treated. We also need photographs in case the police need them." My dad and I looked at each other, then went to the kitchen to make coffee. We were sitting on the patio drinking our coffee. When the women came back, Glenda was wearing one of my shirts. She put the chair next to mine before sitting down. We all sat and drank coffee, talking about what had happened the night before. I found out that Susan had read about George's arrest in the newspaper. The article only said that I was injured without giving any details. She went to my parents. They went to my place to find out how badly I was hurt. They'd already seen the article and called the police for more info. They were going to my place when she arrived, so she went with them. They said they'd tried to call me, but couldn't get an answer. This made me look for my phone, but I couldn't find it. So I asked my mom to call. We heard the bell and found him lying in a flower bed near where I fell. It seems Glenda dropped it. When George attacked her after we found the phone, the women went to prepare dinner. I realized that I was dying of hunger. I hadn't had dinner the night before and didn't have breakfast. I took a hot shower while they prepared dinner. When I was done, I made Glenda take a shower. After she returned, we had lunch and discussed what had happened until mid-afternoon. I don't know how many calls I received from friends and colleagues. I had a few people drop by to see how I was doing. The only call that bothered me was from my ex. She didn't introduce herself, but I got her parents' numbers. She said, "You're a lucky bastard," before hanging up. Everything was back to normal the next week. I renovated the house. I carried on with my business. In fact, I got a lot of requests for estimates because clients read in an article that I run a construction business. I have another problem, though. Well, it's not really a problem. I guess I have this stubborn woman who constantly comes to check on me to see if I'm eating well. It's great to come home and find Glenda waiting for me. I finally gave in and gave her the key. Now I come home to find dinner ready and a smiling, stunning woman ready to set the table and dine with me. I'm thinking about making it permanent, but I'm still hesitant. The past and all the recent events haunt me, but every evening when I come home, when I get home, I see Glenda, and it just fills me with warmth and confidence. She cares for me so much and with such sincerity that I feel ashamed of my doubts. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, we were sitting on the terrace enjoying a quiet evening. Glenda served us dessert and we talked about the future. I shared my thoughts and fears, and she looked at me straight in the eyes and said, "Stan, I'm here because I want to be with you. I see more in you than you sometimes see in yourself." Her words really touched me. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Stan, I'm here because I want to be with you. I see more in you than you sometimes see in yourself. The past is the past, and I believe we can build something better together." Her words touched me to the core. I realized that everything that happened only strengthened our connection. Glenda saw me in the most difficult moments and stayed by my side. I realized that I was ready to move on. The next day, I took the plunge. I bought a ring and had dinner on the terrace under the starry sky with music in the background and candles on the table. I got down on one knee and said, "Glenda, you have become my rock and my joy. I want to spend my whole life with you. Will you agree to be my wife?" She smiled, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Yes, Stan," she said. "I agree." At that moment, I realized that all the trials and difficulties we had gone through had led us to this happy ending. We hugged, and I knew we had a bright future ahead of us. Our wedding was small and we kept it small and cozy, just for those closest to us. We kept working and building our lives together. Glenda became not only my wife, but also a true friend and partner. Now, every evening when I get home, I know that not just a home but a family is waiting for me. No matter what happens in the future, I know we'll get through it together.